Pause right here, right now. Shout out to Alexis, a Fisk alumni, super duper intelligent. Happy to have you up here on the stage, Alexis. What's going on? You got it.
Oh, I think you guys had already answered the question you were asking, whether it was World War One or World War Two. Definitely both wars, but this is specifically talking about World War One.
Yes.
And I was going to say that there was actually a gentleman who brought back a Gatling gun. He was a Greenwood resident. Set it up on a hill to help defend against the mobs and the deputized. But that's all I wanted to say.
Awesome.
Thanks.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that insight. Appreciate that. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, nearly all white perpetrators evaded accountability. In addition to violence targeting whole communities, there were countless examples of white mobs murdering individual black people, a practice known as lynching. According to records kept by the Tuskegee Institute in 1921, white mobs lynched 59 black people, which is an average of more than one lynching per week. One law professor writing about the Tulsa Race Massacre notes that at the time, lynchings, whether for white sport and family entertainment or to terrorize black communities deemed too successful and uppity, grew not only in number, but also in ferocity. It became more vicious. Yes, funded. You got it, sir.
Hey, since they mentioned Rosewood, what was there any restitution paid out to survivors of Rosewood, and was it a state action or federal action? Since they mentioned it,
there was restitution paid to Rosewood, and at the end of the movie, they highlight that and make it very specific. And what I can try to Google it to give you access.
Miss Nels?
Yes.
I read into that a bit. They got paid $150,000 per standing survivor. I think there were 11 of them. And any of the descendants got to go to Gainesville College, right outside of where Rosewood was, for $5,000 to $7,000 a year covered, only for 4 years. So it wasn't the best.
Cash, turn your TV down because that's louder than you are, and want to hear these details that you're adding and contributing to our discussion tonight. Now, what now? Are you able to repeat what you said? I heard some of it, but I just want clarity.
Yes, ma'am. I've looked into the Rosewood reparations claim, or essentially the State Act of Atonement. I believe it happened. It started in 1994 and it went all the way until 2012, 2014 or something like that. But there were 11 standing survivors who were paid $150,000 a person. Any of their descendants who were displaced by the massacre got $5,000 to $7,000 a year, covered only if they went to Gainesville College specifically, which is just outside of the Rosewood area. So it kind of relegated them to an area to only 4 years of college, and only the standing survivors got paid. I don't understand how they got paid, but they don't understand that they're standing survivors for this instance as well. So I'm glad he brought that up.
Yeah, I'm glad he brought that question up too. And and to me, that demonstrates whoever was trying to advocate for these Tulsa survivors, like they didn't even try to bring in courts that would show a precedent for making these victims whole. I mean, because look what did happen in Rosewood. So why, so just looks like poor legal work on that. Just my opinion, allegedly. But looks like poor legal work. Come on now. Anyway. Oklahoma before the massacre. During the late 19th century, Oklahoma Territory had a reputation for being welcoming to Black Americans. Some Black leaders described Oklahoma as a promised land, friendly to Black interests. Oklahoma Territory had over 50 all-Black towns, a record number for any state or territory. The amount of land owned by the Black community resulted from the way Black settlers arrived in Oklahoma. Many came to what was then Indian Territory, accompanying Native American tribes that had been expelled from the antebellum South. These tribes had previously adopted the South's slavery system and brought enslaved Black people with them when the tribes were forcibly relocated. After post-war emancipation, freedom, people formerly enslaved by the tribes received land when Congress divided communal tribal land. Some freedmen became quite wealthy. Many Black Tulsans whom we interviewed proudly identified themselves by stating their tribal affiliation in addition to their identification with Greenwood's Black community. Now, again, I'm going to stop right here because for those of us who be on these Twitter streets, we know about that discussion about the Indian and the freedmen and the this and the that. And this is truly my first time hearing this piece of freedmen history as it relates to them receiving this land. This is definitely proof that Indians had slaves or running slaves, or until just now that's been, I guess, or we don't know. But it's locked up tight in this report. Funded Social, you got it.
Okay, so on that point, the Walketeers, of course, our people were a part of that. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, they did get land. Tulsa, Oklahoma, or the Greenwood district came out of land that was given to them from the tribes. That part has been established. Mm-hmm. But what I want to say is, and this is a lesson, so they moved to this territory, and instead of concentrating in a metropolis, in other words, instead of scattering themselves out in 50 different cities across this state, if they had come together in one metropolis, and they could have had separate incorporations around each other like a lot of these northeastern cities do, they would have been stronger because they would have been in the same geographical location. They actually could have been a capital city had they simply came together instead of trying to scatter themselves even across the state. So I just want to notate that was likely a strategic error, especially when they didn't come to the aid of Tulsa during this event, after this event. Like, where was the troops to rally? They didn't show up. They were essentially on an island unto themselves at the mercy of these other people.
Okay, word. Yeah, I don't know, and it makes it seem like, and you can help me, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can help me here, Black, because it seems like if all of them were in Greenwood, if that's where it happened, it seemed like they tried to do that concentration thing. And then my question is, were they even thinking, hey, this is a potential that could happen? Or as they said, it was welcoming, and it was friendly, and it was Mayberry RFD, and you know what I'm saying? Like, so were the residents in Tulsa, were they really taken aback? Did they even have an inkling in their mind that this kind of thing could happen? Was racism on display while they were there? That's what I wonder. Alexis, you're up. We're going to hear from you, and then you, Cash Gaines. You got it.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of time left, but thanks for letting me up on the stage again, Mel. I wanted to really just address something that Black said beforehand. I'm not going to say I'm sure that they were all, they weren't trying to locate together. Mm-hmm. But remember, when they gave out allotments of land there were oftentimes the allotments of land were so far away from the people that it was allotted to that it was given to them in hopes that they would just give it up. There was this, I can't remember her name exactly, but it was this one young, I can't remember which tribe she was from, but she's a Black American freedman. She's a freedman from that tribe. They allotted her land that was, say, maybe 50 miles away from where she was. And you can just get 50 miles very, very easily in the hopes that she would give it up. But it was on really good oil land, so she became quite wealthy from it. So that was there. The other thing is that the people in Oklahoma were very politically astute. There were a number of Black men that were going around at the time, because remember, back then, everybody Black was basically voting Republican. And they were like, hey, y'all, we cannot all vote Republican. About half of us have to be Republican. Half of us have to be Democrats, because we need to win whatever seats are available so that we can have political self-determination. So I think that they were a little more astute than maybe what we think we see when we read this. Just wanted to share that out. But a lot of times the allotments were given all over the place, depending on where the tribe owned land. And it wasn't always necessarily close by to where the people lived.
Okay, so that could have been what prevented them from being able to assemble as a collective. Okay. Cash, your hand's up, and Funded Social, Black, your hand is up too. Y'all jump on in.
Yeah, let me get away from the TV and get our name flashes.
Okay, yeah, because thank you.
I was gonna say, I'm just looking at timelines real quick and trying to put them on bullets on the timeline. Jim Crow, according to Wikipedia, started in 1880. In my mind, I've always thought of the Great Migration as a reaction to that, but it says the Great Migration started in 1916. Oscarsville, I wanted to bring into the conversation, which is the displacement of more than 1,000 Black Americans and the flooding of that town with Lake Lanier now, right? That's 1912. And even the Great Migration point, real quick, I just want to make it clear that what's happening right now overseas, there are people who are being bombed, but they're given 24 hours to move. And they're saying that that's a genocidal crime against humanity, forced migration. I've never thought of our Great Migration as that, but really it was a forced migration. We were being, ran out of our homes, eminent domain, right. The Red Summer. You mentioned that we were interned. I want to say out loud that we were interned before the Japanese were here. We received reparations twice, at least in Tulsa's instance. And then there's this phenomenon that I've been looking at. And let me try to tie a line from all the way back to Tulsa. Red Summer's in 1919, and so is the end of World War I, or the Great War. Yeah. And it's been argued that a lot of people who come back from war end up becoming police. They end up going from policing people who have no rights worldwide to doing it domestically. And indeed, even in modern day times, 30% of our police force is former military. People who kick down doors, snipe people from across apartments and stuff. I don't need to get too graphic with it. Sure. But look at this last thing. There's something called the Obama effect, where a lot of white men who were tricked into believing that, Saddam Hussein and attacked Iraq and all that, and attacking brown folks, they came back to America and Obama became president and they became police officers. And so in a way that they were deputized in the same way they were back in 1919, 1920, and 1921 with the Tulsa Massacre. I see it as the exact same thing happening again. They go overseas to kill people, then they come back home and do it to their own with the techniques that they learned. Let me mention one last one. Birmingham, Alabama in the 1950s, after World War II, there was a guy who was a bombardier that came back and became a domestic terrorist, blowing up Black churches with the methods he learned overseas in World War II. So we've been surviving a domestic war against people who are trained to be serial killers by the biggest government in the world and the biggest military of the world, and yet we still thrive. So thank you again for the space, and I'm listening.
No, thank you for that information. Go ahead, From the Social, you got it. Thank you for that highlight, Cash. Go ahead, Social, you got it.
Okay, I'll build on what Cash was saying. So I know some military folks, some Black American, current and ex-military folks, and one of the things they do try to do is get into law enforcement, but many of them are locked out. So he's right about that part where the white patriot, quote unquote, does see law enforcement as like a logical next step for them, but. At any rate, he mentioned the Great Migration. Well, there were the exodusters, which would predate the Great Migration, Kansas, Nicodemus, Indiana, which we had a whole thing about how people flooding into Indiana and all the racial violence that they were faced with in that state. And then obviously they started moving further west, Oklahoma, and eventually out to the West Coast. But the people there in Tulsa, some of them were veterans, so some of them had this training and they were prepared. There's an organization called the African Blood Brotherhood, ABB. They are out of New York City. They traveled to Tulsa a year before this mini Civil War, because that's another term that they used when they talked about this event. And they essentially went there and they had chapters all over the country. But they had essentially went there to get people trained up to be in a defensive posture and to be essentially aware of the circumstances on the ground. W.E.B. Du Bois also visited there just before this massacre, and he notated how the Negroes would only shop in their own businesses. They would not patronize white-owned establishments in that area. and he was actually blown away by the fact that they were so organized like that. So when you read the thing where it said, they put this man in prison, and then the people organized with guns to come to his aid. Yes, because they were aware and they were prepared to defend themselves.
Black, boy, I tell you, whoo, thank you for that clarification. Yes, indeed. And no, thank you for that. Wow. And also, yes, what I was going to say is, because I know I read and saw that video where even during this time, Black people were hiring white folks. They had white folks coming in there cleaning for them and working for them. And so I know that had to been, they had to been salty like a mug. Alexis, your hand is back up. What's going on?
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I'll be quick to this one.
Sure.
There definitely was some economic issues that were going on, and I haven't done any research on it. I really need to, but I wanted to put it out here to see if anyone else had heard it. One of my cousins, a couple of years ago, when it was being talked about everywhere, she asserted to me in a conversation that one of the reasons why there was also a lot of angst there is that the residents of the Greenwood district were starting to try to open up some negotiations with for some economic things in Mexico, right, to get some trading done from there to bypass these white people. And that was causing a lot of angst amongst them as well.
So, and you know what, and come to think of it, I guess my question maybe should have thought a little bit deeper because as stated in this report, they were already hip to what had gone on in North Carolina, and what had happened in Wilmington wasn't no punk. They threw them folks out of office and ran them out of town. So yeah, they had to bend. These folks over here in Greenwood, they had to bend. So it seems like they were walking on faith, walking courageously, walking confidently, and clearly for them to be in talks to try to do some international business with Mexico. If you want to call it international at that time, yeah. So see, we always been represented. Let me keep going on. We're on the section of the history of Oklahoma before the massacre, and like I just read, many Black Tulsans whom we interviewed proudly identified themselves by stating their tribal affiliation in addition to their identification with Greenwood's Black community. Oklahoma did not remain welcoming to the Black community. After the Civil War, the lure of newly discovered oil fields drew white settlers to Oklahoma Territory. Many of these settlers were the children and grandchildren of the Southerners who had supported Confederate rebels during the war, and most of whom adopted their forebears' attitudes towards Black people. When Congress granted Oklahoma statehood in 1907, these white Oklahomans drafted a constitution and state laws that contained explicit Jim Crow provisions mandating segregation. Thus, despite its description as a promised land while it remained a territory, Oklahoma became segregated when it achieved statehood. Many Oklahomans adopted other aspects of the Jim Crow system, including the proclivity to commit racial terror lynchings. From 1877 to 1950, there were approximately 75 reported lynchings in the state. Particularly disturbingly, a white mob abducted a 28-year-old Black woman and her young son from a jail in Okemah, Oklahoma, 10 years before the Tulsa Race Massacre. The mob lynched the two victims and, to intimidate residents, displayed their bodies outside of the Black community of Okemah. Tulsa before the massacre. Tulsa is a name derived from Tulsa or Tallahassee, which meant old town in the language of the Creek Indians. Tulsa officially incorporated as a city on January 18, 1898. When oil was discovered nearby, Tulsa had the foresight to build a railroad center and to provide other necessities for oil prospectors. The city grew exponentially. By 1910, Tulsa had a population of more than 10,000, and by 1920, the population of Greater Tulsa was more than 100,000. Revenue from oil and supporting industries made the town prosperous, and it soon garnered the name the Magic City. Tulsa was also a deeply segregated city. Housing ordinances barred Black people from living in white neighborhoods unless they were domestics serving white families. Tulsa had its share of extrajudicial violence, and its victims included those in the white community. Less than a year before the massacre, a crowd of armed men kidnapped a white man named Roy Belton from his jail cell in a Tulsa courthouse and lynched him. The lynching occurred with the apparent complicity of the Tulsa police. In fact, some sources say that the police directed traffic during the lynching. I got to read this again because what I just read says it was a white man that was lynched and the police directed the traffic. So now hold on, because I know I need to get this clarification. Tulsa had its share of extrajudicial violence, and its victims included those in the white community. Less than a year before the massacre, a crowd of armed men kidnapped a white man named Roy Belton from his jail cell in a Tulsa courthouse and lynched him. Now, it doesn't say a crowd of armed Black men, so I'm going to presume it was white men. The lynching occurred with the apparent complicity of the Tulsa police. In fact, some sources say that the police directed traffic during the lynching. It is undisputed that Police Chief John Gustafson ordered police not to intervene. Afterwards, he made a public statement that, although he was opposed to mob justice, his honest opinion was that Belton's lynching would prove to be of real benefit to Tulsa. Belton's lynching rattled the Black community. Many thought that if a mob could lynch a white man with official approval, there would be no protection for a Black man. A.J. Smitherman, a Greenwood community leader who had ran the Tulsa Star, a Black newspaper, wrote that Belton's lynching explodes the theory that a prisoner is safe on the top of the courthouse from mob violence. Now, who disagrees with that? Because, damn. And we've seen it in these Western movies where the white folks come after their own and lynch them for horse thieving and whatnot. But damn. Whew. Continuing on with Greenwood before the massacre. Greenwood was a close-knit, flourishing community. It was a city within a city, a Black enclave inside Tulsa. Mary Jones Parrish, writing shortly after the massacre, described prosperous Black businesses and homes of beauty and splendor. The community was, in the words of one historian, a nationally renowned entrepreneurial center. The number of Black-owned businesses from that time were well documented. There were 4 well-equipped drugstores, many grocery stores, 2 fine hotels, and the Dreamland Theater. Lola Williams owned the Dreamland Theater and a confectionery shop, as well as additional theaters elsewhere in Oklahoma. J.B. Stratford owned a hotel. The Nails family owned a shoe shop. The community worshiped in a dozen of Black churches. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, and other well-respected and wealthy members of the community lived on Detroit Avenue. Many Black families had accumulated enough wealth to decorate their homes in fashion. Families owned pianos, fine living room furniture, and jewelry. Survivor statements reflect that the prosperity of Greenwood as it existed before the massacre. Mother Fletcher described Greenwood as a prosperous society marked by Black wealth, success, and opportunity. Both Mother Fletcher and Mother Randall described living in homes filled with toys, family, and joy. They felt safe and unafraid. Mother Fletcher described the churches, music venues, and sports teams that populated Greenwood. Georgia Walker Hill and Samuel Walker described living in a really elegant home. Beatrice Webster described having a piano and a Davenport sofa in her home, as well as double swings in the yard. Kenny Booker described a lovely home with a piano. Olivia Hooker described her family as owning jewelry, furs, and silver, all of which were stolen in the massacre. W.D. Williams, son of John and Lola Williams, remembered his father owning one of the first automobiles in Tulsa. Now, I'll stop right here because we know that it wasn't in Tulsa, but it was definitely in Oklahoma with the, I want to call them the Sage Indians, where they put those Indians on that reservation, and they thought they was throwing them in the dungeon. Come to find out there was oil in them their hills, and those Indians became, I think it was the Osage Indians, and they became wealthy as a mud. And so I don't know if anybody in here can, I don't know if this was happening at the same time, but we know that the white people at that time were mad and envious and pulling shenanigans on those Indians too. Ooh. Well,
yeah, that was the wasn't that the movie?
Yes.
But yeah, we never got to do a space on that. I never got to watch that. I do want to watch that, but yeah, I would estimate that is around the same time. You know, the demons.
Yep.
They were on the warpath over that oil. Same thing when it was gold discovered out on the West Coast. Whenever resources are discovered, they go insane and they start a bloody, murderous rampage.
So Oklahoma, if you don't know Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Alabama, state's hub for resources. Oklahoma was the largest export, and it just so happens the towns where the oils were being exported and the money that was coming in was actually in near the Greenwood area, as well as some other areas. And I bring this up because when I learned that factories in white neighborhoods where they had positioned themselves were shutting down because the resources were not coming in properly. They were not close to ports. They were pretty much outside of the zone. It brought joy to me because it allowed me to see it was not just on the happenstance of them attacking them because they were Black, but it was because of the simple fact of not only are you Black, but your towns are positioned in areas where the majority of resources that you are exporting out of the United States has to do with oil and other resources. And I keep saying that there needs to be full research and that needs to be blown out of the water because I think I would surmise that what happened in California would be something to the same effect. You burned out an entire community of people like that happened in California because you want to build a smart city, but you won't investigate fully on how it started to actually bring about indemnification. Yes, correct.
Thank you for that. And I'll say this too, the way the survivors described how the houses were, almost every other house had a piano in it. I think it's safe to presume that there were some skilled piano players in all of these homes. So look at there. Okay.
Hey, that was a thing in Rosewood too. Can't remember who had that space, but they really highlighted the fact that they had these pianos, and that kind of drove them insane just thinking about that fact.
Yeah, I think that might have been, I don't know if that was the impetus where the white woman in the movie was like, wow, it might have been I don't know, but yes, yes.
That was the white man in the scene where he was upset because the Black couple had a piano. It was like, well, they got a piano. I don't have a piano. And the man was like, well, can you play it? He's like, that's not the point. The niggers got one. I should have one too.
You know what I'm saying? But we had one because we knew how to get down with the get down. We knew about them 88 keys. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, let me stop. All right, let me keep it moving. Still talking about Greenwood before the massacre. While undoubtedly a prosperous Black community, Greenwood was not a utopia. It suffered the ill effects of segregation. Due to white control of Tulsa's tax revenue, Greenwood was not appropriated funds for sanitation and running water, nor were its streets paved to the same extent as those in white Tulsa. Moreover, although remembered as Wallstreet, Greenwood was not a financial center with brokerage firms or banks. It was, however, a center of shopping and other trade because Black residents of Greenwood were unable or unwilling to spend money in the white section of Tulsa. Those white businesses that would accept Black customers often forced them to endure humiliation. They spent their income almost exclusively in Greenwood. Likewise, Black farmers and residents of small towns outside the city who needed supplies would spend their dollars in Greenwood, not in white businesses in Tulsa. In spite of its commercial success, Greenwood had a reputation among some in the white community as a place where white men could buy drugs or engage in illicit sexual activity. Part of this reputation may have been based upon nothing more than the fact that some establishments in Greenwood played jazz music and sold bootlegged Choctaw alcohol. The year before the massacre, authorities conducted a vice investigation and then scandalous allegations of white women dancing with black men in chalk joints. These allegations, amplified in editorials in white newspapers, likely increased the prejudice of white Tulsans against the community they were referred to derogatorily as Little Africa or Nigger Town. This may have been contributed to their willingness to destroy it. In sum, Greenwood was a prosperous Black community, even if it was not a financial center. Survivors, descendants, and historians all stress that what made Greenwood so very special was not so much its wealth, but its extraordinary sense of community. Mary Jones Parrish, writing in the years after the massacre, emphasized that her love of Greenwood flowed from the wonderful cooperation among the people in the community. A descendant we spoke to during our review likewise stressed that the most important aspects of the community were its strength, pride, and courage. I'm going to keep moving right on to the effect of the First World War. The massacre took place a few years after the end of the Great War. By 1921, many men from Tulsa had served in that war. America's Black soldiers had distinguished themselves and earned appreciation from the highest levels of the French government following their military service. Following their service, these veterans were less willing than their elders had been to accept second-class treatment. W.E.B. Du Bois, a Black civil rights leader, captured this post-war sentiment within the Black community in an article he wrote for The Crisis. In it, Du Bois expressed dismay that Black men who had served so honorably during the war had returned to insults and lynchings, and encouraged Black Americans to resist white violence, concluding, "We returned from fighting, we returned from fighting." Greenwood's Black newspaper editor, A.J. Smitherman, agreed, running articles in his Tulsa Star urging Black residents to forcefully oppose all attempts at lynching. In white Tulsa, a home guard was formed during the war whose purpose was to replace members of the National Guard who had gone overseas during the Great War. The men of the home guard drilled together and prepared to defend Tulsa from attack from foreign or domestic sources. Members of the Home Guard acting for Tulsa's Wartime Council of Defense with the Knights of Liberty also took on the role of morality police, intimidating and occasionally tarring and feathering those suspected of communism and labor organizing. The extrajudicial actions may have acclimated some members of the group to vigilante justice. In addition, these joint ventures may explain the efficiency with which these white men organized during the massacre by making it easier for them to work together. Perhaps the most important effect of the war experience was that both white and Black men of Tulsa gained extensive military training, which they fell back on when unrest began. As discussed below, this has likely increased the use of highly lethal wartime tactics during the massacre. Any comments, statements? This is the next.
Yeah,
yes.
You said Knights of Liberty. Were they referencing a Black when they said that? Because right after that, I got confused.
Right. I think this was like two different white groups. It says here that members of the Home Guard acting for Tulsa's Wartime Council of Defense and with the Knights of Liberty also took on the role of morality police, intimidating and tarring and feathering those suspected of communism and labor organizing. Let me see. Let me try to look this up. Knights of Defense.
No, Knights of Liberty. Knights of Liberty. The secret society that also known as Liberty Knights or Knights of Loyalty. it states here that
Thank you, brother.
it states here that you're welcome. There were an American Volunteer Nationalist Secret Society and Vigilance Committee active circa 1917 to 1918, and it shows them with almost kind of Klan attire. Yeah, with black hoods instead of white, and it says 1918 German. Let me put that German propaganda depicting an American Inquisition against Pacificists or Pacific Kiss, I guess that's what it calls. And it says they are known for the Tulsa outrage in 1917 in Oklahoma and the 1918 lynching of an Ollie King Cohen in Minnesota, in a spree of 1918 tarring and feathering, events in Wisconsin. Now it's events with an S, and in California.
Okay, so they were.
So the Knights of Liberty were national.
Yeah, and just ruining everybody's life. Shout out to Brother Muko on the stage. Hey, Brother Muko, what's going on? How are you, sir?
When you're talking about the Knights of Liberty, it kind of make people understand. For the ones that seen the movie Django,
yeah,
when him and Dr. Schultz went into that first town, and they got the posse together, that little white posse. Well, that's what the Knights of Liberty were like. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And they went around terrorizing them, but they weren't the only group. Right. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You notice what Brother said. It was a volunteer secret society. You know what I'm saying? So we must understand that this was when white supremacy was in some of the probably preteen stages of refinement.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where they were trying to get all of these lynchers and killers on one accord, because everybody wasn't on one accord like they paint the picture to us. Mm-hmm. Okay, it was like okay, like if I go on Rella Hood with my crew, well, it was just like a Warriors thing. Okay, y'all remember the movies Warriors? You know what I'm saying? The Warriors they was cool in some hoods, and in other hoods they had to get a you had to get a pass. And that's the way that these white nationalists were back in the day. You know what I'm saying? You had some white nationalists that didn't fuck with eugenicists.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You had some, so all of them didn't bang with each other like that. Okay. You know what I'm saying? So I just wanted to make that point.
No. Thank you. I appreciate all the illumination that's happening here, because it's really adding context, and so it's just helpful. Still moving through, and y'all share the space. Shout out to everybody in the space. Share the space, please. Moving here, the massacre. The facts of the massacre set forth below are drawn from the commission report, survivor accounts, newspaper articles, primary source materials, and many books and scholarly articles describing the massacre. We supplement these relatively well-known accounts with descriptions from a report submitted by Agent T.F. Weiss of the Department of Justice Bureau of Investigation, a predecessor agency to the FBI. The catalyst for the massacre, May 30th, 1921. The immediate catalyst for the massacre was an allegation that Dick Rowland, a young black man, had assaulted Sarah Page, a young white woman, in an elevator that Page operated in the Drexel building. According to most accounts, Rowland was a shoe shiner. Some accounts identify him as a delivery boy who used the bathroom at the Drexel building because it was one of the few public bathrooms designated for use by colored Tulsans. On May 30th, 1921, a white clerk in the Drexel building told police that Rowland had tried to sexually assault Page. It is not known, and will likely never be known, what happened in the Drexel elevator. Some maintain that the two were romantically involved and that the clerk had witnessed a lover's quarrel or a lover's embrace cut short by an unexpected witness. Others believe Rowland accidentally bumped into Page or stepped on her foot, perhaps because the Drexel building's unreliable elevator landed unevenly. Police Chief John Gustafson told Agent Weiss that Page bore no scratches, bruises, or deranged dress, and that she stated that the boy made no bad remark of any kind. This observation is corroborated by the fact that Page declined to pursue charges, which suggests that she did not perceive Rowland's actions to be criminal. Although there was no evidence that Page suffered any physical injury, much less that she suffered a sexual assault, police arrested Rowland the next morning. The news article, May 31st, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., on the afternoon of Rowland's arrest, the Tulsa Tribune ran an article about the incident entitled, "Nabbed Negro for Attacking Girl in Elevator." The article falsely claimed that Page was a poor orphan and characterized the incident as an attempted assault, language that would have implied to white readers of the time that Rowland tried to rape Page. The article also falsely asserted that Page bore scratches and other evidence of a violent attack. Before their deaths, several survivors reported that, along with the Nabbed Negro article, the Tulsa Tribune ran an inflammatory editorial expressly encouraging white Tulsans to lynch Rowland. Copies of the front page Nabbed Negro article are still accessible, likely because the article was reprinted in other papers, but no editorial has been located, even though the Oklahoma Commission offered a reward for anyone with a copy of the editorial. One historian obtained a microfilm copy of the Tulsa Tribune, May 31st, 1921 edition from the official newspaper archives and observed that both the front page article and most of the editorial section had been removed, suggesting an editorial inflammatory enough to be deliberately cut from the paper. There are several possibilities for the conflict between the survivors' accounts and the lack of a physical copy of the editorial. It is possible that, at the time when newspapers published multiple editions each day, the paper with the editorial had only a limited run, and all copies had been lost or destroyed over time. One journalist suggests that there might never have been an editorial, noting that a June 1st, 1921 Tulsa Daily's World front page arrest article, similar to that of the Tulsa Tribune's article from the day before, reported that there was a movement afoot to go to the county courthouse and lynch Rowland. The journalist suggests that some readers may have conflated the Tulsa Daily World's lynching statement with the Tribune's non-existent editorial. The journalist further notes that a June 1st, 1921 edition of the paper, otherwise identical to the May 31st edition, was found intact and did not include an inflammatory editorial. But a historian who viewed the microfilm copy of the Tulsa Tribune believes an editorial existed and was deliberately excised, perhaps to the Tulsa Tribune could avoid blame for the subsequent massacre. Whether such an editorial existed separate and apart from a news article is less important than the fact that the Tulsa Tribune ran an inaccurate article suggesting that a black man had sexually assaulted an innocent young white woman. The editors likely would have known that such an allegation of unwanted sexual contact between a black man and a white woman would be inflammatory, and that, in America at that time, this type of allegation often led to a lynching. Yet, the paper chose to run the article. Massacre scholars have noted that the newspaper's owner, Richard Lloyd Jones, held racist beliefs. Thus, he may have hoped to incite a lynching or may not have cared if one resulted if the article helped to sell papers. One author has suggested that members of the police force who made the arrest deliberately fed the paper inaccurate information because they hoped to incite a lynching and wanted to blame the paper later if their plan succeeded. It is impossible to apportion blame for the article at this date or to determine whether the article was a result of ill intent or recklessness. What is certain is that by the afternoon, Tulsa was rife with rumors of an imminent lynching. The standoff at the courthouse, May 31st, 6 p.m. to 10:15 p.m. By 6 p.m. on May 31st, police handed Rowland over to the sheriff's office, which had control over the courthouse jail, perhaps because authorities believed that the jail would be easier to defend from a mob than Tulsa Police Department facilities. Sometime between 6 and 7 p.m., a crowd of approximately 300 white men gathered at the courthouse, many clamoring to lynch Rowland. Sheriff Willard McCullough refused demands to hand Rowland over to the assembled white crowd. He also took steps to surround Rowland with his deputies and to disable the elevator to make it difficult for any would-be lynchers to reach Rowland. At about 8 p.m., 3 white men breached the courthouse entrance, intending to get to Rowland, but Sheriff McCullough refused to let them get past him. This incident shows how serious some in the crowd were about lynching Rowland. In fact, according to District Judge Redmond S. Cole, one white man in the crowd was a hardened criminal who had previously participated in a lynching. In a letter to the Bureau Agent Findley, Judge Cole opined that one of these would-be lynchers was Claude Yellowhammer Cranfield, a suspect in the earlier Belton lynching. If Judge Cole's opinion is correct, then some in the assembled crowd were both serious about lynching and capable of carrying out their intent. In at least one interview, Sheriff McCullough indicated he thought the lynching threat serious, estimating that the crowd of 500 to 600 white men gathered at the courthouse, at least 100 were talking loudly and openly about committing a lynching. I gotta stop right here. Y'all see how the 300 to 600 people for one man behind this supposed been sexual attack. Is that me? Somebody help me with this. Can that many people be upset? These people are just bloodthirsty.
That's just the bottom line. They were bloodthirsty and looking for a reason to be angry and upset and to be murderous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the media was definitely complicit in lynchings. And I want to also note the police also. So that takes me back to what we were saying earlier. The state, the city, and county is culpable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when they say we don't have anyone that we can try or to lay the blame, well, those police officers' names are recorded, you know, in those states, in those names of even the judge, recognizing that the criminals who had already been arrested because they had committed crimes. Lynching was a crime and is a crime, and so to me, the state is culpable. The state should be charged for a genocide, for sure.
Well, I would say this. This report in and of itself, if there's not a lawyer worth his salt that can come up and bring back, then I don't know what the hell's going on. Where's my man when you need him? What's his name? Always showing up. Go ahead, Brother Milko, you got it.
You talking about Benjamin Crump?
Yeah, where's he at? Yeah, Ben. Okay, all right.
Yeah, you talking about Crump.
Yeah.
I want to say this, and I just want to maybe ask a question to everybody. Does this look like a repeat? You know, brother said, yeah, the media was complicit. I would say this is the reason why they took the wire off the air, because they constantly exposed the newspaper, all newspapers at that time, and even now. You know, this is evidence, and I don't even like to say this, but this is just even more do tell evidence that we cannot avoid dismantling the system of racism, white supremacy. We have to. Yeah. I mean, if we don't, this is just going to keep happening. I mean, it's happening right now. Look, he has a goddamn media mogul in his goddamn cabinet. If that's not telling you, yo, look, Facebook, TikTok, they are the new newspapers now. Look at this. They're running the same game tactic. As long as we don't tackle the real issue, they're going to keep running this game until just like our grandsister Francis Cress Walton said, before she passed, he said they are in the final stages of refinement. Mm-hmm. So this is now their operation. This is operation status. This is the status quo. Mm-hmm. And as long as we continue to look for not to control our resources, but to gain things like money and bills and things like this within this system of racism, white supremacy. Mm-hmm. We have to understand that it's not going to work. Justice is not going to come from this. Okay. Word. So I mean, I just want us to and look. This isn't even up for a debate. This is with the evidence. So if anybody want to debate it, look. There go the evidence. Debate with the evidence. Don't debate with none of us. Debate with the damn evidence.
Right. No, word. Thank you, Brother Muko. Black residents decided to go to the courthouse to protect Rowland. These men were not confident that Rowland's cell was impervious to mob attack, since this was the same facility that had housed Roy Belton before a mob lynched him. After the massacre, the media, as well as the federal report, characterized the attempt to lynch Rowland as half-hearted and the men at the courthouse as more curious than violent. The implication was that the black men of Greenwood overreacted to an